It's Song Talk Radio.
Welcome to Song Talk Radio. This is the show with songwriters talking to other songwriters about the craft of songwriting, most of the time. We share tips, tools, and techniques, and together we all become better at writing songs. I'm your host, Neil Modi, and with me, my co-host, Phil Emery. How are you doing, Phil?
I am doing very well. Finally got the studio at the new house set up, and you can see the cables and guitars and so on. So hopefully getting the acoustic treatment down. So having some fun stuff finally.
Yeah. Cool. Very cool. Yeah, it looks great. And that's for our listeners and our viewers on YouTube channel. Check it out. You'll see Phil's cables on the walls, and apparently that's all you need to make sure that it's a studio. Once you got cables on the walls, you're good to go.
Yeah, apparently.
And to the rest of you, please send in your comments and questions to @SongTalkRadio on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, feedback@songtalk.ca for the email, and we'll share your thoughts on the show. And please visit songtalk.ca to see the show post for this episode, to find links to things we mention, and to download lyric and chord sheets for songs that we feature. Tonight, we're pleased to be continuing our series on helping our listeners with their home recording studios, whether you're just starting out or you've been doing it for a while. Our topic tonight, we're going to zero in on Midi 2.0. If you've heard or watched our episode from July 2021, we did an episode called All About Midi. We got the lowdown on the basics of Midi and the various things it can do for you in your home recording studio. In that episode, we also mentioned the announcement of Midi 2.0, which is the second version of Midi, which is a full 37 years after Midi 1.0, which still astounds me. And tonight we're happy to have with us Mike Kent. Mike Kent is the chairman of the Midi 2.0 working group in the Midi Association. Mike has consulted on audio and music to Yamaha, Apple, Roland, MuseScore, Shure, Artiphon, Analog Devices, and NASA. Prior to working as an independent consultant, Mike worked at Roland for 32 years. He is a co-founder of AimNote, a new company that intends to release some of the first Midi 2.0 products in 2023. Welcome to Song Talk Radio, Mike Kent.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me to talk. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, Midi and Midi 2. Awesome. So I'm glad to be here.
But before we get into the Midi 2.0 stuff, I'm curious, what does NASA use Midi for?
It's an interesting project that goes back some ways. It wasn't so much MIDI; it was more audio, audio processing of voice. And it was actually in the NASA Ames Research Center, and they have a simulation center there, somewhat like if you remember or have seen the old movie from the 80s, the War Games movie.
Oh, I remember
it's
that.
kind of like that. It's a simulation center. And they needed voice processing to do voice disguising. And I could talk about that for quite a while, but I helped them develop an automated system for voice disguising in their simulations.
Voice disguising?
Yeah, the main point was that they didn't want to know who they were talking to. If they were talking to somebody that they knew in work and they're simulating something, they didn't want to know, I'm talking to Joe, that's the guy I hang out with for lunch every day. And so voice disguising technology, so that their simulations were more realistic in that there'd be people talking to somebody they don't know.
They don't know, right. Okay.
Right.
Remain objective.
Interesting story, but probably I could go on for that one and explain it.
Well, I'd love to have you back on the show to talk about that, because that would be really fascinating. So why don't you just give us a quick run around? What's the deal with Midi 2.0, and why did it take so long? 37 years.
Well, there have been efforts along the way to do something new called Midi 2.0, but fundamentally, Midi 1.0 is stuck around this long because it's really good.
Yeah.
It really, even notation of music, the notes on the page are kind of they're not actually music, right? They're a representation of music.
Right.
Okay. But music and the ideas of music have been around for centuries, right? And so MIDI, like notation, is just a way to describe music. It's not the music itself.
Right.
And it's very much like a representation, like notation. And so MIDI 1.0 did a pretty good job of saying, well, in music, we have notes and we have rest between them. There's a concept of tempo. And so MIDI 1.0 was really good. And apart from that, it didn't sit still for 37 years. We added an awful lot to it year after year, expanding the specifications and adding new features and new capabilities. So it didn't sit still.
Okay.
But as long as we were still using the same data format, we determined in the MIDI Association we're going to call it MIDI 1.0. And we didn't change the name because all of those things sat and connected to each other all in the same environment, because the data format of MIDI 1.0 was consistent regardless of, all the new additions we had. So that was MIDI 1.0. So when we get to MIDI 2.0, the reason it's a 2.0 is fundamentally there's some big enough changes that it felt like it was warranted to call it 2.0. But it's still the same architecture, the same semantics, the same architectural ideas and about how it works are still retained. So it's still MIDI. It's not something completely new. And some of the other efforts over the years that might have been maybe even superior to MIDI 1.0 never caught on because they were too different, and there wasn't a good connection between those ideas and the way MIDI worked. And so you couldn't connect the things. And so some of these other ideas just haven't gotten the traction. But MIDI 2.0, I think, gets traction because of its compatibility to MIDI 1.0.
It's backwards compatible. So
yeah, it's backwards compatible.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Thing.
Yeah. And so, we've been working on this in the MIDI Association for many years, and we're still not done yet, right? There's no MIDI 2.0 products really in the marketplace yet. Well, I shouldn't say that. There really are a few, but nobody knows that they're MIDI 2.0 product because there's nothing else to connect them to, right? So they're still fundamentally acting as MIDI 1.0 products, even if internally they're MIDI 2.0 ready.
Right, because like MIDI 2.0, like you have to have your hardware device, your software, your DAW, like it's got to be 2.0 across the board, doesn't it? Or at least the features that are new in 2.0, they have to be there.
You'll be able to mix and match in a system with MIDI 1.0 devices and MIDI 2.0 system devices all come together to make one system. But for the MIDI 2 functionality to operate, something has to send something that is about MIDI 2.0 and something has to understand it at the other end.
Yeah.
And so it's two devices talking to each other. If they both do something with MIDI 2.0, then MIDI 2.0 starts to act. If not, they just continue to use MIDI the way they always have. But in fact, it's this bidirectional that is a foundational concept of MIDI 2.0. MIDI 1.0 was designed as a set of commands. One device tells another device some command, play a note, stop playing that note, were the basic commands of MIDI 1.0. And it really was a monologue. With MIDI 2.0, we try to establish a dialogue between products where they say, hey, what do you do? Who are you? What kind of features do you have? And let's make those things work together. And that's a foundational idea of MIDI 2.0 is this bidirectional link between the devices.
Because with MIDI 1.0, well, not 1.0, but MIDI 1, let's call.
Yeah.
It's I was surprised to find out that it's all serial. It's basically one bit of data followed by another bit of data all at once. Even though there's all those pins on the connector, it's still just one bit of data followed by another bit of data. And
exactly.
It's just, So I have noticed this when I was when I had a whole bunch of hardware stuff and doing lots of MIDI stuff and driving it from a DAW, is that after a while things would get kind of spongy because there was, cramming all these channels onto this, basically through these cables, probably too much. I didn't know at the time, but.
Right. Yeah. So you can send enough data that you actually start to negatively impact timing because they can't all go at once. You send one, then the next, then the next. If you send too many of them, something is going to be delayed. If you try to send too many things all at the same time, right? Things end up getting slightly delayed. Remarkably, MIDI is still working after 37 years because
it's pretty awesome.
That big a problem.
No, never has been for me.
And we found some ways around that, right? So MIDI on a 5-pin DIN cable doesn't operate at the same speed as MIDI on a USB cable, where we have a lot more bandwidth available to us. And it still retains its serial nature in that I send one message followed by another and then followed by another. But on USB, because USB is faster, a controller keyboard could send several things all in one USB packet, and they all arrive at the same time. They're still kept in order, but I can put a lot more data over USB. And today, a lot of MIDI is done over USB, right? The composers are sitting with a computer and a controller keyboard or their instrument, and the data is going over USB. And so you don't have the same kind of backlog causing timing issues in that scenario.
I remember back in the day, not so far back in the day, but when USB first came around for MIDI devices, my first MIDI controller, it was flaky as hell. Like it would drop out, it would lose notes, it would drop out. It was not a very good, and I couldn't figure out what the problem was. Was it my computer? Was it the thing? And it just, I ended up using an old school MIDI cable into the MIDI ports on my audio interface. Perfect.
Right. I was around. I started working on USB technology with Microsoft in 1996, and I was the one of the contributors to and led the work on the first USB MIDI specification. So that was 1999 that spec came out, and honestly, the USB systems, the drivers, the first OS was Microsoft's Windows ME. And USB was really flaky for the first few years. There's no question.
I'm talking like 2003, 2002.
Yeah, exactly.
Around there.
And I'm guessing that it was the drivers that probably came from that company that were problematic.
Yeah.
We don't need to name names of the company that you bought from, but it was probably the drivers. And USB is really stable today, right?
These days, I mean, my current controller doesn't even have a MIDI out for it. It's only USB. Yeah,
by the mid 2000s, like 2005 and so on, USB became really quite stable and it's only gotten better since.
Mike,
so what do we have in MIDI? So sorry, go ahead, Phil.
Mike, can you talk about how MIDI 2.0 actually allows external hardware to interface with your DAW in a really sort of deep way?
Sure. Okay, so we have in some ways we have yet to find out exactly what's going to happen, because the major DAW companies, many of them are members of the MIDI Association and have been watching the development or participating in the development of the MIDI 2.0 specs. We have yet to see their products come to market and see exactly what they do. And just like MIDI, the way one company does MIDI and the way another one does it can be different. And so we expect the same with MIDI 2.0. And so exactly what will happen is a little bit unclear. But MIDI 2.0 establishes this, as I said earlier, this bidirectional connection. And so when you connect one device, like a controller keyboard, to a DAW, they can query each other. So the DAW can ask of the controller keyboard, who are you? What brand, what model, and what features do you support? And what controllers do you have? What controllers do you send? Is it just like a piano thing with maybe just a pitch bender and a mod wheel and no other controllers? Or do you have 16 knobs and 8 faders and what are they called? And this kind of exchange of information can go on so that the DAW can better configure the controller keyboard. And so that bidirectional communication and auto configuration is a big part of MIDI 2.0. I think to me, that's one half of MIDI 2.0 is just this integration or the ability for the devices to discover each other and try to adapt to each other so that the user has to do less configuration and has a richer experience.
Right. Because I'm a big Native Instruments user for software, right? And sure. I do have a Native Instruments keyboard. And when I run the Native Instruments software, they talk to each other. They know exactly because it knows because they're made by the same company. But what you're talking about is a universal across the board, across all brands. and across all the Ws. Right?
Yeah, the native instruments model is a great one. It's I'm glad you brought that example. We want to be able to do that, but across brands. I want to be able to have a DAW from one company and have hardware from another company, but have it feel like that same integrated experience.
Yeah. Because a lot of the Facebook groups and things I'm on about home recording, a lot of people, you see complaints about that. How do I configure my knob so that it controls this and it's not working and it's not talking to each other? And that sort of communication, right?
Right. So that is the dream, but it's probably a 5-year before we really see that happen, right? Because there's so much new, and we have yet to discover which companies are going to prioritize which features of MIDI 2.0. So 5 years from now, 10 years from now, these things will start to feel like commonplace. But between now and then, little pieces of MIDI 2.0 will start to be enabled, and the things will just get slightly better and better. And some companies will do this, and some people will do this in their product that they design, and slowly the whole environment comes together. But it's going to be a few years, just as it was with MIDI 1.0. MIDI 1.0 came out in 1983, but that didn't mean that it worked really well and you could do all that you could do in 1984 or 85 or 86. It took some years to kind of settle in where everybody was doing a lot of MIDI.
Got my first keyboard in 1987.
Also, can you talk about the higher resolution, which is sort of an interesting thing?
Right. Well, I think the higher resolution I would put in the other half of MIDI 2.0. Remember, I just said a moment ago that I think the auto configuration in this bidirectional dialogue is one half of MIDI 2.0. I think the other half is what I would say is increased musical expression. And so high resolution, I think, is part of that. Okay. And so in MIDI 1.0, many MIDI users are familiar with turning a knob on something, and it has 128 steps from 0 to 127. And sometimes you can hear the steps depending on what property you're changing, right? Sometimes you can hear the steps. Now, MIDI 1.0 wasn't limited to 128 steps. In fact, there's ways to get much higher resolution in MIDI 1.0, but most products never implemented the 14-bit controllers. And most people, a lot of users don't even know they exist, but they are there, but they've been rarely implemented. In MIDI 2.0, we have 32-bit values and for controllers. And so we go from this really what is fundamentally 128 steps up to 4 billion steps, right?
Only 4 billion.
More than we ever need, right? Most properties you're not going to want to use, turn a knob and send billions of messages to get from 0 to 100%, right? But the potential is there for that kind of resolution. And so resolution of control goes up. Resolution of pitch is another one. There's a bunch of new pitch mechanisms. So you could play a note and just say, instead of saying, this is a middle C, you could say, well, this is a middle C, but I want it 3 cents sharp or 2 cents flat. And so there are pitch controls, and there's a lot more availability of pitch functions, people who want to play with micro tuning or just intonation so you're not always using equal temperament, right? Those of us who compose from a keyboard, we're familiar with equal temperament. Myself, my background is a trumpet player. I'm used to playing in a trumpet section where the trumpet players are tuning themselves, or great vocalists will do this, tune themselves so the chord is pure, not an equal temperament chord. So we have tools for pitch. The other area of increased resolution is timing. And we have optional timestamps that can be put on messages so that they retain their original timing. And so even if you go over a transport like the MIDI 1.0 transport where things get smeared a little bit in time, each one can be marked with a time so that when they arrive at the other end, the receiver can put them back to the timing that they originally had. So even though things are serial and stacked up, you can say, I want all of these notes to sound at exactly the same time. I can have 100 notes all at the same time, and they actually have the same time assignment with these timestamps. So higher resolution time is also possible with MIDI 2.
What about velocity? Is that really
velocity goes from being a 7-bit value to 16-bit value.
Yikes.
So 16,000 steps.
Right.
And furthermore, it's not just the increased resolution, but for example, in the MIDI Association right now, we're working on what we call a profile for pianos. And we're discussing velocity and discussing how instruments can exchange their velocity curves with each other. And so if you've got a particular controller keyboard and a piano plugin running, and the piano plugin has a certain velocity curve and your piano doesn't really match it well, many piano plugins have an ability to open up a window and change the curve. If you got a high-end piano plugin, you can do this. Well, in MIDI 2.0, we want the piano to be able to tell the plugin what the curve should be. And so we're working on those kinds of interoperabilities to improve this interaction so users have to do less of this kind of configuration. And so I think that leads to greater musical expression too, greater capture of a musician's performance and greater reproduction of the musician's performance.
I've also heard about this thing called MPE. What's MPE?
Well, MPE is kind of, in some ways, some of us consider it kind of like a MIDI 1.5. It's on its way to MIDI 2.0 in that it adds expression by fundamentally using multiple MIDI channels. Each note that you play is assigned to a different MIDI channel so that you have expressive control over each note independently. MIDI 1.0, for example, if I'm playing chords on a keyboard and I want to open the filter is going to open on all of the notes. But with an MPE controller, maybe I slide my finger forward on one note and just the filter opens on only that one note. So you need a per note control mechanism, and MIDI 1.0 doesn't really provide that.
Is that aftertouch?
There is a poly aftertouch, which is the only one that is per note. So we have one of them. MPE assigns notes per channel so that a channel controller for channel 4 is really only affecting one note. And so it does that. It gives you that per note control in MPE. It's in some ways, it's a little bit of a hack on MIDI 1.0, but it works and is really expressive. And there's a lot of musicians who are really enjoying that change or that newfound expression that MPE brings. And it's really cool. MIDI 2.0 does the same thing. And in fact, we're currently, there is an MPE profile working group in the MIDI Association. We just released an improved MPE specification, and we're currently working on a profile, a MIDI 2 profile for how MPE works within a MIDI 2 context.
Oh, would it be improved somehow in MIDI 2.0 or the same thing?
The biggest changes in MIDI 2.0 will probably be in discoverability. Currently, an MPE device, you buy an MPE controller, some kind of device like a Linstrument, and you buy a plugin or a synthesizer, and you connect them, and the user turns on MPE in both of them, and then they work together.
Is that those Rolly? The Rolly
is one of those, yes.
Okay.
And so you could get a Rolly keyboard and then connect it to an MPE compatible, like Ableton recently added MPE capabilities. So you connect it to Ableton and you turn on MPE. But all of that's user configuration. In the future, you just plug it in and the DAW says, oh, you're an MPE device.
Right.
And MIDI 2.0 will recognize that through what we call the MPE profile. And so the device says, hey, I conformed the MPE profile. And we're working on profiles now for a lot of different instruments, and we'll see more of these come in the next few years that define common ways that devices should work. So I mentioned the piano profile a minute ago and exchanging piano velocities. We're working and we're getting close to finishing an orchestral articulation profile. For any of your listeners that work with orchestral plugins, you probably are familiar with articulation switching. You say, well, I'm playing a bow up, now a bow down. Now I want the violin with tremolo. We'll hang up on that person. Sorry. And so you're changing articulations. And so we're writing a profile in the MIDI 2 working group for orchestral articulation. Each plugin does orchestral articulation a different way. Mm-hmm. And MIDI 2, we've defined a standard way of doing it. And so as the sound libraries start to adopt MIDI 2.0, I could put in a line with one plugin and say, well, what does it sound like with this other plugin? And the articulations will copy from one plugin to another. Whereas today that doesn't work because each one has its own articulation mechanism. Or you could also enter in a line for a violin with all of its articulations and say, I want to hear that with a clarinet, and have the articulations be meaningful to the clarinet. So if you had it with vibrato, then you'll hear a clarinet with vibrato. If you had a pizzicato, then the clarinet will play a staccato note. And so we've written a scheme for this kind of broader sharing of articulations across different sound libraries. And so these are some of the kinds of things that bring, I think, both easier setup to the user and allow them to do musically more than they did before. And I think MIDI 2.0, those are the main points, is we want you to be able to do more, and it should be easier to do it.
From my reading, it seems that sort of the big goal is to have a world where you just plug stuff in and it all just kind of works and you don't even think about it. You don't have to map it. It just, you plug your hardware synth into your interface or your computer, and then you go into, I use Cubase, you load up the instrument, and it would have all the presets from that instrument already there. And
right, yep.
it already maps to your keyboard controller. So you don't actually have to do anything. It just kind of works,
Right, exactly. That is the optimistic, idealistic goal of MIDI 2.0. Yeah. That's the kind of goal that I think you see in the 5 and 10 year plan. I think you see those things come together. You'll see the beginning of some of those things in 2023. You'll see, DAWs when you first plug in a device that is a MIDI 2 compatible device. The DAW will just automatically get a list of the patches that are available to you. Probably not long after that, you'll see that when you plug in a controller keyboard and you're running a plugin for a B3 organ, that the drawbars configure themselves to be drawbars. And if it's got a display above it, it'll say 16 foot, 8 foot, 5 2/3, and so on, right? All those, that will be there in the display. And then you change to an electric piano plugin, and those faders will change to, here's the tremolo amount, here's the distortion amount. And all of that will happen automatically for you through MIDI 2 discoveries. And so those are, I think, pretty idealistic goals, but they're realistic in the long term. It'll take us a while for those things to all really get to the point where you don't have to think about it. But it's a step-by-step from where we are today with MIDI 1.0 to that idealistic vision that's 5 years out. Where these kinds of things happen as more and more products in the marketplace start to implement these features.
Yeah, it's not as much a technical problem as it is a problem of companies adopting these things. Is that
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot of features in MIDI 2.0. And it's going to take a while for companies to adopt all of them, right? And so some of them will. Here's one of the problems is, one company will adopt this feature, another one will adopt this, and you'll say, well, this is a MIDI 2 device, so is this. And you connect them, and they're still doing just MIDI 1.0 because they're not connecting on the MIDI 2 features, because what this one chose to do and what this one chose to do were different feature sets. This one chose to do the patch exchange, and this one chose to do high-resolution controllers. That doesn't help you yet, right? So it's not until we start to see the products all kind of start to implement the same things that these features come alive.
Is this an expensive process for the manufacturers? I mean, are they going to have to, one of the issues with the manufacturers, if they want to have a new feature, they have to look at it and say, okay, this is going to add another $200 to the base price. That's not going to fly in the market. Are these components still really expensive for them? Or are these built off of fairly cheap ICs?
Some of the components are going to be more expensive, depending on the things you want to do with your product. There's a lot of MIDI 2.0 that you can do, particularly the auto configuration stuff, that doesn't cost a lot in additional processing power, but it is more. There's no doubt about it. And I think you'll see that initially, the products that implement MIDI 2.0 will be the more expensive ones, because that's where there is the room and possibly where the processing power exists to, in existing platforms to add some MIDI 2 functionality.
Right. Well, you're also talking about like high resolution controllers, like Like my pitch bend wheel only outputs from 0 to 127. That's it. Like it doesn't.
Actually, your pitch bend doesn't, because pitch bend was already a 14-bit control. But the
mod wheel.
Your mod wheel probably yes. Yeah. So MIDI 1.0, as I said at the beginning of this, MIDI 1.0 is really good. Mm-hmm. And so there's no reason that MIDI 1.0 products won't continue to exist for the next 5, 10, 20 years. Some devices will say, all I really need to do is send some basic notes and a pitch bender, and that's all I need. And so that device can run MIDI 1.0, and it'll integrate with MIDI 2.0 systems and be just fine on its own. It doesn't necessarily need any of the enhancements that MIDI 2.0 does. Mm-hmm. And so I wouldn't discourage anybody from buying a MIDI 1.0 product today, because it'll work with future systems, and it's not going away anytime soon at all.
Is MIDI 2.0 still on the 5-pin DIN?
No. At this time, we have no plans to run MIDI 2.0 messages on 5-pin DIN. Oh, okay. That is the new high-resolution messages. However, all of the auto configuration stuff can run on 5-pin DIN, because it's using a system exclusive that is the same on MIDI 1.0 or what we call the new universal MIDI packet. So MIDI 2.0 introduces a new data format, and the universal MIDI packet is a way to encapsulate data. And inside a universal MIDI packet, we could put a MIDI 1.0 message or the extended high-resolution MIDI 2.0 message inside there. And so we're not going to put the universal MIDI packet on 5-pin DIN, or at least there's no plan to do that now. This is not to say that somebody a year from now couldn't propose it and that's impossible to do it, but at this point, there's no plan.
So currently, does that mean that people with older hardware, like you've got a old Roland Jupiter synth back there, like that only has 5-pin DIN, no USB?
Yeah.
Is that potentially have some capability with MIDI 2.0, or?
It could, yes. If the manufacturer wanted to update the firmware, mm-hmm. they could, for example, update the firmware so that at least it does what we call a MIDI CI discovery. MIDI CI is MIDI capability inquiry, and it's kind of a core of MIDI 2.0. And then this is this bidirectional exchange. So your DAW could say to the other device, "Who are you?" using this MIDI CI command. The device will come back and say, "Well, I'm this manufacturer, I'm this model, I'm running this version of software." And so if the manufacturer chooses to update the firmware, maybe that's enough features to add value to the user, in that you didn't have to go to the DAW and tell it, "Well, I've got this controller keyboard, and I want you to call it this," and enter in things manually. It can auto-discover. Or maybe it's easy for a synthesizer company to use the MIDI CI capabilities to dump a list of its patches and their locations. Yeah. And so it may not be able to take on the velocity exchange that the new piano profile does, but maybe there's some feature for that synthesizer that makes sense and is an easy upgrade to the existing firmware without having to bring out a brand new model.
Right.
So some devices will get new firmware that adds MIDI 2 features to existing products. We will see that over the next couple of years. I think there'll be some products that just add MIDI 2 to an existing platform. Other platforms are going to, the next revision or the next model that comes along will have MIDI 2.0.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about the products that your company is developing then for?
My company, Ominote, is a brand new company. I co-founded with Michael Lowe, who is the original founder of iConnectivity. Some of your listeners might be familiar with iConnectivity products. And Michael and I have known each other for about 15 years, since he started iConnectivity. We met then, and because of my work in USB, and he's really doing some innovative things with USB when he started iConnectivity. And he's no longer with iConnectivity, but he and I have started this company, Ominote. And the first product that we have out is actually called the Protozoa. And the Protozoa is, protozoa is one of these little tiny life forms, right? The simplest form of life is a protozoa. And the protozoa for us is the beginning of a product. But it's one that we're sharing with the industry. And protozoa is, actually, I have one. I have a couple of them here. Let me show you one. This is a protozoa. Okay. You'll see that it's a bare circuit board with a display and some knobs on it and a couple of processors. And this is not a product that musicians are going to use. This is a product that product developers or manufacturers use. And so we're providing on here MIDI 2 functionality, and we ship these to manufacturers. So MIDI Association members so far are the only ones able to get this. We'll be opening this up to other developers probably towards the end of this year. But MIDI functionalities on here, including MIDI, USB MIDI 2.0, translators between MIDI 1 and MIDI 2, and a whole MIDI CI functionality, this capability inquiry. A lot of that is in here, and we're going to be releasing this as open source. So currently, MIDI Association members can get this and use it to test MIDI 2.0. And so it is part of a core testing platform that the MIDI Association is using to prototype and test the specifications we're releasing. And so this is a core component, along with something called the MIDI Workbench, which is a piece of software from Yamaha. And it talks to this, and between the two of them, all of the MIDI 2.0 functions are being prototyped. But manufacturers can take this and pull the source code from here. This is running on a Raspberry Pico. And so it's a very friendly open platform. And so we have the source code, and manufacturers can take this and put it into their own products. So this is the first product that we have, but our next products will not be for other manufacturers to use and for this testing, but there'll be MIDI interfaces for musicians and MIDI 2.0 and eventually some audio products as well. But that's the beginning of our company, Ominote, is MIDI 2.0. We are leaders in that technology, and we've been participating in that. And so please buy some Ominote products when they come out in 2023.
Definitely,
that is so
keep
cool.
Tabs on that. That is so neat. And what about software? Like, is there any indication from DAW developers or plugin developers to say, hey, we're on board with this, and next version is going to have?
I can say that if I was to pick the top, say, 8 DAW companies, 5 or 6 of them are members of the MIDI Association. There's a couple that are not. But I can't really speak on their behalf. There are some things that I know confidentially on what some of them are doing. But I will say that Apple is the first OS with MIDI 2 functionality in the OS. So that might give you some hint as to what Apple might do in Logic. And Google followed shortly thereafter with MIDI 2.0 functionality. Well, about a year later, Google just now released MIDI 2 functionality in Android. And Microsoft has given some picture of what they want to do through a presentation given at the NAMM show now a couple of years ago. So Microsoft is coming along as well. And those companies all participate, very active participants in the MIDI Association. The DAW companies, I think the only one that's really said anything is Steinberg. At the ADC conference in London, they showed a prototype of VST3 running MIDI 2.0, where they were taking MIDI 2.0 per note controllers and converting them to per note expression, which is the way VST3 does it. And so they did not make any commitment there to say, this is what we're going to do. They just said, this is something we're playing with, and here's a demo. And that's, I think, the only public information from any of the DAW companies is that one presentation. But they're all aware. And
as the market grows, then people, when the market demand grows, then they'll start responding to that market demand.
And maybe they need to wait for what the hardware is capable of before they...
Well, most companies don't like to announce what they're going to do until just before they do it.
That's very wise, actually.
So I think we'll see in April at the next NAMM show. April in 2023 is the 40th anniversary of MIDI. I think you'll see some MIDI 2.0 products announced at the NAMM show in April. And I think that we in the industry kind of feel that that's actually the beginning. Some people have complained, if you go and look at the forums, like, this is taking forever. And yes, it is taking forever, but it takes a long time to write these specs and then prototype them, make sure they work, and then products start to come. And people forget sometimes that in 1983, when MIDI came out, in 1984 and 1985, there was still only a handful of products. And it's going to be the same in 2023. There'll be a handful of products that come out in 2023 and more in 2024 and so on.
And even before 1983, how long were people working on the spec? I mean,
it was, the spec was actually done in about 1.5 or 2 years.
Okay.
But it was a much simpler spec.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it was 9 pages long.
Oh, wow.
Okay. The original spec. Okay. And it was mostly an adaptation of the DCB control language, which this Jupiter 8 has. Okay. Before MIDI, the DCB control language kind of was the forerunner of the data format of MIDI 1.0. And then an interface system proposed by Sequential Circuits, the 5-pin DIN. And those things came together, and a bunch of other companies had some input to finally generate this spec that was 9 pages long or something like that. And I think shortly after it became a 22-page document, by the time it was published and so on. But, today the MIDI 2 specification is hundreds of pages long. Because it just does a whole lot more, and technology is so much more grown up, and there's just a lot more to think about. And so everything we've done, we tried to do in context of today's technology. 32 bits is a standard processor these days, some being 64 bits and so on. So it's a different world. So the specs are a lot more complex. And so it's taken us longer to get there. Yeah, but people do want. I have to recognize that it does take time. Like you say, it takes time for manufacturers to get on board, for the software developers to get on board, and test and implement. Right. Yeah, and this year we're very much in prototyping mode where we're testing these things. When the first 2 drum machines shipped, one was a Roland TR-909 with MIDI, and one, I can't remember the model number, from Sequential Circuits. And when you connected the 2 of them, they are off in synchronization by 1/24th of a quarter note, because one company figured that a quarter note didn't need a clock. You just need the clock. There's 24 clocks per quarter note. And one company said, well, when the quarter note is announced, you don't need to put a clock there. And the other one says, no, you put an announcement of the quarter note and a clock. And so every quarter note would drift by a 24th of a quarter note or something like that. And so you throw, over the course of 10 or 12 bars, they ran out of sync. And that's the way MIDI 1.0 was to begin with. And those 2 companies had to get back together and say, well, let's clarify that spec. Right. So we're trying to do that before we get too many products in the marketplace by building prototypes.
Right.
So that's where we are today. And so we appreciate people's patience with this thing coming and us talking about it for a few years and it looking like it's going nowhere.
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty deep spec, and you can do a lot with it.
Yeah.
So it's going to take a while.
It's a lot of capability. I mean, even MIDI 1.0, I feel like a lot of people, but some people don't use it to its fullest extent. Like, I only discovered articulation switches and things several years ago, maybe,
Right. Yeah.
It wasn't a thing before. And it's just like, but with all that's coming into MIDI 2.0 there, and depends on, what you buy into and what the manufacturers buy into and all those sorts of things before it gets to the end user and then learn how to use it.
Right. Yeah.
And make it work for you. So. Awesome. Well, I think that is about all the time we have on Song Talk Radio tonight. Special thank you to Mike Kent. Those are great insights about the future of MIDI and what we all have coming down the pipe. We unpacked a lot of stuff in this episode. So thank you, Mike, for all.
I appreciate your time.
Mike, how do we get more of you?
You can find me at mk2audio.com and ominote.com. MK2audio is my consulting site, and ominote.com, AMENOTE.com. But probably the thing that all of your listeners should do is go to MIDI.org and sign up for a free account there.
Okay.
Okay, and there's a discussion forum. You can ask questions about MIDI there. MIDI.org is the place to start.
There's a newsletter, I assume?
Pardon me?
There's a newsletter, I assume?
Oh, there's a newsletter, yeah. You can decide whether you want to opt in or out of that, and
of course.
the discussion forum and all of that, yeah.
Oh, cool.
But there's a lot of great news about MIDI 2.0 on MIDI.org.
Right. And we will certainly place links to all that stuff on our show post.
Great.
For sure, so the listeners can.
Well, thanks,
can check
Neil
all
and
that stuff
Phil.
out. All right. Thanks so much. So we want to hear from you, our listeners. Send us your comments, questions on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, at Songtalk Radio, or send us an email, feedback@songtalk.ca. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel for live performance videos and full episodes with us in little boxes. Subscribe today to the Songtalk Radio podcast on your favorite podcast provider. And don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter at songtalk.ca. You can find links to all the products, books, and web services we mentioned on the show on our resources page on the website. And wherever you are in the world, please join us online via Zoom at our next monthly Songtalk meetup. It's free to join on meetup.com and free to attend the meetup. Stop by songtalk.ca for the link, bring a song and a lyric sheet, and get constructive feedback from other songwriters. It's a great time. You can follow me at neilmodi.com. You can follow Phil at
philemery.ca.
And Mike, are you on social medias? Where can people follow you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You can, if you search Mike Kent MIDI 2.0, you'll find me online.
Perfect.
You should look for the MIDI Association. They're more important than me.
Fair enough.
I say that because I'm one of the managers there. So. I'm on the technical standards.
Well, you did good.
So yeah.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Okay.
Be sure to stop by the website, songtalk.ca, to browse past shows and find out how you can be a guest. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and keep on writing and keep on MIDIing.
MIDIing. Good night, everyone. That is so cool.
Right.
Excellent.
That was amazing. Holy cow. That was a lot of information.
Yeah. Reading through it, it reminded me a bit of OMS. Do you remember?
Yep.
I think it was that was Opcode who did that, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Opcode
had the MIDI system in about 1989 through to mid 90s. It was a thing. And it more or less was replaced when Apple got their OS running better.
Yeah. It worked pretty well, though, for a while. It was pretty cool.
It did. I was an opcode user. Yeah.
Well,
So.
I think what's interesting to me is that, like, until tonight, I didn't really get a full understanding of what the interoperability thing, like the communication between devices. Because when I first heard about that, I was like, so what? But I think maybe because I'm used to them not communicating with each other, I just take it for granted that they can't do anything. You have to program it, and it's not worth the effort half the time. And I'll just mouse it in after the fact or something like that. Like, you know, it's not something I'm used to. So I think like you're saying, the idealized world, you just plug it in and it knows everything about the device you just plugged in.
We haven't released the spec yet for a graphical user interface, but we've prototyped it and we made it work. So imagine you may be familiar with synthesizers, where you buy the synthesizer and you download an editor for it. And the editor knows how to talk to that instrument. And like I've got, for example, Moog Sub 37, right? It's got all the knobs on the front panel and you program patches. And I've got on my Mac and my Windows PC, I've got both. I've run both platforms. I've got an editor for that. Yeah. And I can use that as an editor and a librarian. Well, Moog had to create that app. And they had to create one on the Mac, and they had to create one on Windows, and maybe one on iOS as well. And imagine now that they don't have to do that. The DAW just says, tell me what your front panel looks like. Tell me the name of all your knobs. And then it automatically just generates it. And the DAW has never seen the device before, but the device tells it how to build an editor for it.
That'd be amazing.
That's really
awesome.
Yeah, I remember when I had a little JV 1010 Roland synth unit, and the editor was kind of clunky, but I could, transfer patches back and forth and do little controller things, and it wasn't great, but it was doable.
Yeah, I worked for Roland at the time. Our editors were never good. We were not a good software company.
I used to have the Galaxy editors.
Yes. Yep.
Yep. And one of the best features, if you're ever working with a company, because most companies don't do this, I don't understand why, is they had this random function. So, and I have a VFX, and I got really into programming that. And you do these random functions, and it would put like numbers way out of range where they should be, and you could get the machine to do stuff that it was never intended to do, and it was so cool. And you wound up with a lot of junk, but you'd go through it, and every now and then you'd go, "That's really neat," and you could build it up into something. And I wish more companies would embrace randomness or a random generator, because it's a wonderful way of generating ideas. You know,
I can imagine with the GUI stuff that we're working on is using a thing called property exchange, and so you ask the device for its properties, and so the thing will come back and say, "Well, I've got these oscillators, these filters, envelope generators, and this is the structure of this," and you can auto-generate then a picture of all the controls. I can imagine on the side of that a random slider, and the more you slide it up, the more you pick a patch, and then you start doing the random, and it starts getting further and further away from that. And as you get to the top, it's nowhere near like the original. Bring it back down and do it again, and totally get a different set.
A completely different thing. Yeah.
That would be so cool.
Yeah, and that would not be difficult to do. And so, but when will that stuff happen? It's well, we don't have the GUI resource written yet. The spec is not written. It's in priority for next year. We'll just keep adding more and more features here, but that is one that I look forward to having. But it just hasn't come up in the priority list yet as compared to other things that we think have bigger impact. I think the orchestral articulation profile, when it comes out next year, and when sound library companies start to adopt that, it's going to change the way people write music for film and television.
I think I could see that getting a lot of traction, because those people who do that stuff know about that stuff, and they care about that stuff.
Yeah. I think it'll be the biggest change since orchestral libraries came out.
Yeah, sure. That would be
really. It's going to be really revolutionary. I mean, you do this. You might take a line from the brass and copy it to a snare drum, right? And now you want the snare to do that. You copy and move stuff across instruments all the time. Or I've got a trombone line and I want to copy it to the French horn so they're playing it in unison. I want all those articulations to go. And today that doesn't work. That doesn't happen, right? But in the future, those kinds of things will happen. So I think it's going to change the way film and television is done.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting, because right now it's like you go into these Facebook groups and stuff, and who's got an articulation map for this particular plugin?
Right. Yeah.
What drives me nuts about like Steinberg, like I use Cubase. Steinberg is a great company, but I don't know why they do this. They'll send you they sell you this instrument that has all these articulations, and you think, oh, they would give you a project that says, here's how you use this instrument with all these articulations. And they don't do that. And I've never understood that. It's like, what DAW people are using, and so people buy this stuff and they kind of go, oh, well, and they don't feel like they get any value, and they don't buy more stuff because they don't understand how it works. To them, they understand it, but to most people are just going, what's an articulation? Why would I use it? And they don't use it.
That's what YouTube is for.
Yeah. Well, I think MIDI 2 will help with that stuff as well, because once you do learn the articulations, they transfer from one library to another. Yeah. And it's going to lead to sales of more libraries. Right now, people are limited because they go, I've got this violin library or strings library or whatever it is, or full orchestra library, and I like it, and I put all this stuff in. But if I buy a different sound library, which may be better for this song, I can't use all the same articulations. I'm going to have to do it all differently.
Yeah.
And the idea that you can just say, well, let's hear that same line on a different library. and have it keep its articulations. It's just going to change. And consequently, I think people will buy more sound libraries than they have.
Yeah.
Probably. If anything's easier to use, then you'll get more sales out of it for sure.
Yeah.
And at least the industry is aware of how successful MIDI has been.
Yeah.
And how it makes people want to buy stuff and plug stuff into other stuff.
Yeah.
So they can understand the value of investing in it. So
yeah, there are some companies who don't appreciate that particular value. There's some companies that really like to lock you into a monopoly. And they're like, yeah, we're not going to adopt that articulation where people can then easily transfer it to somebody else's library. If they don't like our library, they should buy our other one and add on to that. And there are companies that get into this closed mind, closed system kind of mentality. And I don't think that serves most musicians very well.
Because that was the thing we said on our first episode about MIDI, is that all these companies, Oberheim and Sequential Circuits and Roland and Yamaha and Korg, and everyone worked together to make this thing. And that just seems unfathomable today. Like what group of companies is going to do that today?
Right. But there are companies that really want to stand on their own, and very often it's the biggest ones, and it's because they can.
Yeah.
And I'll pick on Apple for a moment. We saw the news this week. Google is complaining that Apple texting to an Android phone doesn't work very well. People send a picture or a video and it doesn't arrive on an Android phone because Apple's not supporting the latest industry standards for texting. But Apple says so. Apple's response this week was, Tim Cook says, "Well, buy your mother an iPhone."
Yeah.
It wasn't, we're going to make it more compatible with Android. Why isn't everybody using Apple?
What a tone-deaf thing to say.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't want to pick on Apple too much because I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me because I work for them.
They can take it.
But there's that kind of mentality in the sound library world as well, and in the DAW world. There are certain companies that are just more closed, and no, you buy into our system. Pro Tools is one of these that really doesn't like working with other people. Unless they're plugin companies who support their own custom format, because you can't take that plugin and then plug it into anybody else's DAW, right? So Pro Tools is one of those companies that's fairly closed. And
I'm really sick and tired of having to deselect AAX every time I install a plugin. Like, come on.
Yeah.
I don't need it. I don't want it.
Right. Yeah.
AAX. What is that? It took me a long time to even realize what that was.
Pro Tools is a recording tool, but I would think with your the bent that you have in songwriters and so on, I would be recommending almost any other DAW because it's the least friendly to songwriting as far as I'm concerned.
I don't know anyone who uses it who likes it.
No,
they use it because they have to, but no one actually enjoys it.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Anyway.
This is great, Mike. Thanks so much. I have a million other questions.
For coming, Mike.
But,
Well, maybe 6 months or a year out, you want to do another one of these, an update?
For sure.
Maybe after the April NAMM show, when some things happen, get in touch.
Yeah, for sure, I will. Yeah, that'll be amazing, and we'll let you know when the podcast drops on this episode.
Yeah. Now, do you have any kind of forum for exchange? Do people feedback to you, comments by YouTube, or what kind of feedback do you get from your audience?
We get emails. We do get comments on the YouTube sometimes on the show post.
Yeah.
For example, that's right. For the most part we get emails.
Right. I was under the impression this was an audio podcast, not a video.
It is. We do also have a YouTube channel. I think we have more listeners on podcasts than on the YouTube channel.
Otherwise, I would have set up my camera and zoomed it in so you didn't see my garbage cans in the back corner.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. I was just checking out the Jupiter.
Well, normally my camera's like cut off right about this level. So you see the Jupiter or whatever keyboard I have behind me. Right. It's a little bit lower and in this way, just a little bit. But anyway.
Oh, looks fine.
It doesn't matter.
No worries. For the most part, it is audio. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We just do it because this is how we record it. We used to actually do the show live in a radio station.
I see. Cool.
So,
and for a while there, we did have a GoPro camera that recorded the whole room on video, and we used that on YouTube. And often we had people performing live on the show, like with a guitar, right? So we video recorded that.
So,
yeah.
and whatever. So there is a bit of video content, but I think by and large our listeners are listening to audio. They're not viewing, because I mean, who wants to see three faces in boxes? That doesn't add a lot of value.
Right. It's not a lot. No. But if you're sitting at a computer, watching YouTube is a friendly thing to do. So
very true.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people are listening to music on YouTube now, apparently.
Yeah. Lots of fun.
Anyway.
All right. Thanks so much, Mike.
Okay.
It was
Thanks,
a
Mike.
fantastic show.
Yeah, I'm happy to participate.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
All right. Have a great night.
Take care.
Okay. Great weekend.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So I'm
Okay.
going to do my darndest to get this ready for tomorrow.
Sure. What's tomorrow? Saturday.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll see. If you do, then I can maybe get it
yeah.
published for Sunday.
Yeah. So, and that'd be good. Yeah, it's a good show. I mean, very geeky, but I loved it.
Yeah, I think many of our listeners may get a little lost on this one because it was pretty nerdy. There's a lot of technical in there, but that's okay. I mean, we go there sometimes. That's fine.
Yeah,
we may get it. We may get somebody who was looking for content about MIDI, but is also a songwriter and discovers our podcast that way.
Exactly.
The more people, like I'm totally going to share this episode in the Cakewalk groups.
Oh yeah,
that I'm part of and stuff. Is that you guys might like? I never post about the radio show in that group, but this episode you might find interesting. Most of them are songwriters.
Exactly. Yeah.
So they may, I didn't even know about your podcast.
That's that the thing where you can plug your keyboard into your computer, and the computer will just know the patches and then map all the controllers. That's just that's awesome.
That's amazing. That's just kind of like how, but it makes perfect sense that it should be an easy thing, really. But
yeah, well, because everyone does stuff in a different way. So
yeah, I think that's the biggest roadblock is no one wants to, like you say, like everyone wants their own monopoly on everything.
Yeah.
I'm totally into Native Instruments now. Like I've gone so deep into their system.
Yeah.
That I'm never going to use anything else.
Yeah, well, why would you? Because it does everything you need it to do, and it's quick and it's easy,
and it's all,
and you don't have to think about it. Which is huge.
They just announced Complete 14. Have you seen this?
Yeah, I know. It's
got a whole whack of isotope stuff in there.
Yeah,
and so it's Native Instruments, Isotope, and Plugin Alliance are all one company now.
Oh, really? I did not know that.
Right. So the Complete 14, in addition to having all the Native Instruments stuff, has also got Ozone, like the full version of Ozone. And it's got a bunch of Brainworks plugins from Plugin Alliance. And it's just like this mishmash of stuff. And all the people on the Native Instruments group are like, but I already own Ozone. Like I'm gonna upgrade a Complete 14 to get something I already own.
That's right. Yeah, that's true, actually. So you just got 13 though, didn't you?
Well, I bought 13 last year. I upgraded to 13, but then they gave me Ultimate like 2 weeks ago. So like I'm good at this. I'm not touching 14. What are they going to give me? Another piano yet again? There's not a lot. I mean, I went from 8 to 10 to 13.
Yeah.
So I skipped 11, 12. I skipped 9. This is just too much.
Yeah. After a while, you got to stop trying out new plugins and then just actually make music.
Yeah. I was playing with some of the Symphony Essential ones today that I got. It was pretty good.
Nice.
Pretty good strings, and the brass. There's a Session Brass Pro or whatever that does not with Complete 13, but it's with Complete 13 Ultimate. It's like a 30 gigabyte database just for brass.
Holy smokes!
It's gigantic, but man, does it sound good. And the articulations, they're like holy cow.
Those libraries that the pros use who do movie music, I mean, they're just stupid huge.
Yeah, they're monstrous. Well, like I said, I've got a 2 terabyte SSD and NVMe SSD in my computer now.
You'll need it.
And half of it is just Native Instruments libraries.
Lots of stuff to play with.
Oh yeah, gotta do some songwriting at some point.
It's time for songwriting. I'm just installing software.
Exactly. Oh, the software is installed. It took like 3 days, but the software is installed now.
So back up. You have to get another huge hard drive to back everything up, so that if it crashes, you can restore it.
Yeah, well, I have an older hard drive. There was a hard drive from my dad's old computer, and that's my backup drive. It's a 5,400 RPM, slow as molasses.
Wow.
This thing. So anytime if I need to have to restore my system or something like that, I just like load it up, let it go. It takes like 20, 30 minutes to dump everything back in.
Yeah.
It's not bad, but then everything's just as it was, it's just the image, right? So
yeah, I back up to a Backblaze.
To a what?
To Backblaze. It's an online backup.
Yeah.
So it just sort of does it at night. It's been great because when I've been away and I've had like a last minute job thing I had to do, I can just sort of go in and download the files and work
Oh, that's handy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is handy.
It's only like $5 a month, I think.
It's not bad.
For per computer.
And how much storage do they give you?
Enough? It's almost unlimited, I think.
Oh, really? Okay, so it's pretty big, eh?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so far I've just been using that extra hard drive, and I have an external hard drive that I back up my documents drive to every once in a while.
Yeah.
And even that one so the problem I had was that my documents drive is 6 gigabyte. My backup drive is only 6 terabyte. My backup drive is only 3 terabyte.
Right.
So Windows backup, the first time I tried it, it'd be like, can't do it.
Right.
Because it needs to back up everything first. But I have everything backed up already on an external hard drive. So all I want are the files I've modified this week.
Right.
So I actually reached out I searched online extensively to try and find a program that would do this for me. I couldn't find anything that could do it for me. I reached out to a programmer on Fiverr and paid the guy like $60, $70 to write a Python script for me that would actually do this.
Oh, wow.
So I just run it as a task thing in Windows, and every night it just searches through my documents, sees what I've modified today, makes a copy of the folder structure, and dumps those files onto my backup drive.
Oh, okay.
And then I back up the whole thing on my external, once every few weeks or something like that. But at least if something goes wrong today, I have yesterday's and the last 2 weeks worth of files on that other drive. So it's not perfect. It's still inside my PC.
Yeah. Look into Backblaze. It's pretty good. And
I've heard of that. My brain is just like, I don't want to pay for some online thing if I have all the hardware I need. But eventually, I think I may need it because these big capacity hard drives, they're not cheap either. You want a 12 terabyte drive, it's like $600.
Yeah, and it's you set it up and it kind of does it at night and you don't have to think about it. So it does it constantly.
Yeah, which is kind of cool. I mean, mine does it. I've got a program that it just does it in the middle of the night. It just wakes up the computer, does its thing. I get an email in the morning from my at least from my Acronis backup software that it succeeded. Oh, cool. And it's validated and everything. I even got the same thing on my dad's computer, and I get emails from Acronis saying my dad's computer is last week or so he's ran out of space on his backup drive, so I got to go over there and tidy things up.
Right. Yes. Well, when I started my business, I was so good at archiving, like every job I had, and had them all. I had them on floppies, and then I had them on zip drives, and then
drives. Oh my god!
I had on CDs, and I had about 100 CDs, and I think I had to actually use an old job like once.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because I'm always creating new stuff. I almost never use an old. But back when I worked at a print company, people would always say, "Oh, the thing that you did last year, we need that, but update this." But the work I do never does that. But I still archive stuff just out of habit. But
oh, really? Yeah.
I almost never use
those zip drives were. I was using them in university. My God, they were so unreliable. People lost like an entire semester's worth of work.
I was so lucky; I never had any problems with them.
Really,
they were huge in the design industry. Like people just had like 50 of them, and you send out files all the time.
Yeah, people had all their AutoCAD drawings and stuff on there, and just like pop it in, corrupt.
Oh, jeez.
And back then, no one was, had multiple backups of stuff. This was it. It was all in that one cartridge.
Well, things are better now.
Oh yeah, so much better. All right, man.
All right. Well, have a great weekend. And
you too.
Emma.
Yeah, say hi to Heather, and congratulations again. I saw her post on Facebook today. Really nice.
Got a ring and all that type of thing.
What's that?
Got a ring and all that type of thing.
Yeah, all that type of thing. Wedding stuff. All right. And we'll and I messaged Nabil about next week, so he's preparing his stuff.
Awesome.
For the guest next week. Nabil and Teresa. So yeah, we'll be good.
All right. That'd be great.
All right, man.
Okay.
Okay.
Have a great weekend.
Great one. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.